Canine influenza. Should you be concerned about it? Yeah, probably. Is this an epidemic? Well, it's getting to be in some places. It's all over the country now. Well, let's just talk about what it is. There's two different variants of this, H3N8 and H3N2. Similar to coronavirus, but it's not infectious to humans. So there's no transmission between your dogs and you and your dogs. There is transmission between cats and this, although it's not as prevalent as it is with dogs. What are the problems here? Well, it is very, very infectious. If your dog is exposed to a dog who has influenza, your dog is almost 100% certain to get it. So infection rates are something around 100%, very, very infectious. I'm going to run down here a little bit. What's the mortality rate? About 10%. Two versions of it, and there's a bit of a problem with this because there are vaccines available, and we'll talk about that. But there are separate vaccines for both, and you can get a combined vaccine, which is what you would want to do. The problem is you cannot get a vaccine right now. If you go online to places like Chewy, All Vet, Allied Vet, you will find that they're out of stock of it. If you go to your vet, you'll find almost certainly your vet is out of stock of it. Why is this? Because they haven't made enough, because it's on the rise like crazy. This is kind of like the pandemic we saw with Corona, where we weren't prepared for it. We didn't have a vaccine even available back then. The PPE, the protective equipment, was being used up like crazy, especially in places where it first showed up, New York. And we got into this crisis situation around the world. Different people have got different views about coronavirus and its impact and how we dealt with it. So I'm not going to get into any of that. But this is extremely infectious. And it is, the majority of dogs that get it, they do recover from this in about 2 to 4 weeks. That's the recovery time. The problem gets to be in the dogs that really have a rough time with it. Those are dogs that are weak, old, young, with compromised immune systems. And what happens is they get a secondary infection. They get a secondary infection in the upper and lower respiratory, up here and in their lungs. They get pneumonia, and then they can die from pneumonia. So that is the direction it goes. Part of the problem is that 20% of dogs who get this are asymptomatic. They don't show any signs of it, but they are still shedding the virus and getting other dogs sick. So part of the problem here is very infectious. It is transmitted by waterborne droplets. So a dog sneezes or coughs, and your dog is in the vicinity, 10, 20 foot, potentially could get the virus. If it gets the virus, it gets infected. So that's the transmission part of it. How long does it take for it to show up? 2 to 7 days. And during that incubation period, the dog is, when the dog is showing signs of it, can get other dogs infected. And the infection period is something around, day 3 through like day 10 is when the dog can get other dogs sick. So the symptoms of this would be that the dog has a cough, is sneezing, and maybe has a discharge from its nose. Typically runs a temperature of something in the order of 103 to 106. Any temperature above 102 would be, of course, for concern. What's the diagnosis? Well, the problem is that it's difficult to diagnose this as being different than something like kennel cough. So there is a test that a vet can do. There's a PCR test that a vet can do, and I'll bet you that most vets can't do it. So the diagnosis is not simple. And if you've got a dog that you suspect has canine influenza, you really should not take that dog to the vet, because the moment that dog has gone to the vet inside the office, or the moment that you go in the office and start touching things, potentially transmit it to any other dog that goes there. So this is a real problem. And if you go look at the literature, what they suggest that vets do is the dog stays in the car, they go out there with a full Tyvek suit on. They look like they go into a decontamination zone for radiation spill. then probably not. I mean, I bet you that no vets are going to do that. So how do you get rid of it once it's in the vet's office or your place? You can disinfect with normal disinfectants, will get rid of it. It stays alive on surfaces for about 24 hours. So it's fairly easy to disinfect. But if a dog's been in your whole office, what are you going to do? You're not going to wipe down the whole office. So the place that is the most likely that your dogs are going to get this would be obviously other places that dogs have been. And where's that? Doctor's office, dog parks, boarding facilities, shelters. And in fact, you will find, if you go up to Chicago, for instance, I think the majority, if not all, of boarding facilities will require that you show a vaccination before your dog can stay there. And so if you take your dog to a facility, I would want my dog to be vaccinated. In fact, what started this whole thing was Chanel needed to board one of her dogs for a week. And the vet said, we're only taking dogs in that have been vaccinated. And she said, well, do you have the vaccination? I said, yeah, we do. We're only giving that vaccine, we've got a very short supply, and we're only giving that to dogs that we see on a regular basis. And the other problem is if your dog is not being vaccinated for both versions, it's not really covered, is it? So if somebody's got their dog at a facility and they've been asked, is the dog vaccinated? And they say yes. If it wasn't vaccinated for both versions, then the dog is still susceptible to getting it and giving it to other dogs. And just because your dog has been vaccinated does not mean your dog won't get it. What it probably means, though, is if your dog does get it, it will have a mild case and it won't develop into something that's more serious. So there is a good reason to vaccinate. In the past, what we said about canine influenza was that it was a lifestyle vaccination. You vaccinated dogs that were going to shows, hunting dogs, outside a lot. Those are the dogs you vaccinated. The ones that were staying home, you didn't vaccinate. But that has changed because of what's going on. So this whole thing is ramping up, and that's why I think you need to be aware of this. This whole thing is ramping up. So what would I do? We take our dogs out for walks, but we are going to steer clear of other dogs. We're going to keep at least 20 foot away from other dogs. What we typically do is, we love to go visit with people as we walk our dogs and say hi and talk to them and meet new friends. That is going to stop for the moment. We are going to wave to people and say hi, and if people want to come over, we're going to say, oh, we're not going to do that. Canine influenza is kind of a bit rampant. We're a little bit concerned about that. I think it's wise that the dogs don't get together. That's what we're going to do. And our dogs don't go to the dog park anyway for various reasons, but I advise that your dogs don't as well. So shows, a problem. Going to the vet, a problem. Going for walks and in contact with other dogs, a problem. We've got puppies. That is a real problem, because you cannot vaccinate puppies. You cannot vaccinate pregnant dogs. And puppies would be very vulnerable to this. So you've got a little small puppy that's a week old and it gets canine influenza. That would be a rough road for that puppy. So, pay attention to this. And remember that the cats can give it. There's a transmission between cats and dogs. It's not as significant. I don't know what the transmission rates are between cats and dogs. It doesn't say anywhere in the literature. But it is shown that dogs and cats can transmit this between each other. So you've got cats around like we do. Our cats roam around. They potentially could get it. So we're going to pay careful attention to our cats. There is not a approved vaccine for cats. So you can't even vaccinate your cat anyway. Okay, so here we go. Treatments. How do you treat this? Well, of course, the first treatment is you never get it, or you get a lesser case because you vaccinated. Great. If you're in that boat, then you're ahead of the game. Otherwise, there are, you're going to have to go to your vet. There are antimicrobials. There are non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs that you can give. Basically, what you've got to do is treat the secondary infection, the pneumonia if it develops, and keep the dog hydrated. And if you can continue to do that for about a week, then the dog will probably come out of the whole thing okay. So last part about this would be hygiene. And I talked briefly about this. Common household disinfectants. A 20-to-1 ratio of bleach to water would be sufficient as a knockdown to clean surfaces. And there's all kinds of commercial products out there designed to sterilize vets' places in your kennel, if you have one, that would be fine to get rid of this. So, Cody has stud dogs and he has visiting dogs, and we're going to have to be careful about this. So we basically are going to quarantine any dog that comes to us. It's going to be quarantined. this is one of the reasons why we AI. We don't allow physical contact between studs and females anyway. But now we've got the problem that a female can be up in our area where they're housed while they're being bred. And if that dog has canine influenza, and maybe it's in one of those 20% doesn't show it, we could be cleaning that area up, transmitting those germs to our other dogs and giving it to our whole population. And if you get it in your population, it's probably going to go through the whole lot. And so you've got a chance that you could get some dogs in some serious trouble. So I think this is not to be taken lightly. I don't want to put people on a panic. I don't think this is necessarily a panic situation, but I think it's sensible that you're aware of it so that you can then try to avoid and reduce the possibility of your dog ever getting it in the first place. And remember, this is not a threat to you at all. This is strictly dogs and cats. And like all things, it will eventually subside. But right now, if you drew a graph of the number of cases versus time, it does this kind of a thing. And we're somewhere up in here right now. It's going to get worse before it gets better. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Bye. Thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate people who subscribe to me. It helps me, encourage me to do more of these videos. But do remember, a disclaimer here, I am not a vet. I'm not a licensed medical professional. I'm purely a person who's been breeding dogs for the last couple of decades. Any information that you got from this video, use at your own risk. There's nothing implied here, and certainly this should not be used as a substitute for advice from your veterinarian or your medical professional. I hope you enjoyed the video. Come back for more of them. Bye.